Father Lee will illustrate his remarks with excerpts from the opera played on the Yamaha. Father Lee.
Thank you, Peter Allen. There's a question I keep expecting to turn up on the opera quiz, and it's never asked. That question is, what do the four Bohemians buy in the shops by the Café Memu in Act 2 of La Bohème? Can you answer it? Well, Schaunard, the musician among the four, buys a horn with an out-of-tune D. Then Collina, the philosopher, buys a second-hand overcoat with big pockets for big books, and an old runic grammar to put in one of the pockets. Rodolfo, the poet, can't afford a coral necklace for his new love, Mimi, but he does buy a pretty pink bonnet to set off her nut-brown hair. And the painter, Marcello? Well, there's usually a trick lurking somewhere in those opera quiz questions. Marcello is so sick with love for his Musetta, who has deserted him, that he buys nothing. Instead, he just wants to sell what he calls his virgin heart. La Bohème is about much more than the four Bohemians. It is filled with music that tells of youthful love and death in an unsurpassed outpouring of melody. And that is what made it my favorite opera when I was young. That and Mimi's tiny flower hands growing warm for the last time in the muff, and the moonlight Rodolfo sees on her face when she's alive, and the sunlight he tries to shield her from when she is dead and he doesn't know it yet, and the first ray of springtime she waits all winter to see from her attic window. These and the music that goes with them would wring tears from a stone. But they are not all that there is in La Bohème. And I'd like to speak a little today about the opera's richly detailed atmosphere, its remarkable dialogue, and especially about its four musketeers. Puccini was well equipped to set the rakish four to music. He had himself once lived a starving artist's bohemian life. When he was in his 20s and poor as a church mouse, he shared his room in Milano with an unruly baker's son named Pietro Mascagni. Yes, the same Mascagni who was one day to compose Cavalleria Rusticana. Together the two of them pooled their pennies to buy the score of Parsifal, to learn from Wagner. And together they marked the map of Milano with red crosses to show the danger areas where they might run into their creditors. There are also tales of Puccini carefully quartering a herring to make a meal for himself and three others, of his dining beyond his means with pretty girls at sidewalk restaurants. There is even a tale of his pawning an overcoat. Though some of these stories sound suspiciously like post factum biography, Mascagni himself has affirmed the truth of many of them. Together, the two composers-to-be and their artist friends lived la vie de bohème. A charming life, said Henri Murger, the author of the original stories on which the opera is based. A charming life and a terrible one. Vie charmante et vie terrible. Let's look at the four Bohemians one by one. The tenor among the four, Rodolfo, is something of a portrait of Henri Murger himself. Rodolfo is a poet, headstrong, impetuous, editor of a journal called The Beaver. Most of the time, he sings in impetuous triplets. Rodolfo thinks, characteristically for a poet, in metaphors and similes. The stove that won't give warmth is for him a gentleman of leisure who won't work for a living. As Mimi lies dying, he says, "She is beautiful as a dawn," and she gently corrects him, "You've got the simile wrong. You mean beautiful as a sunset." Rodolfo often compares himself to a millionaire, rich with millions of dreams and rhymes. Everyone knows his great dreaming melody with its impetuous triplets. But what are the words to that melody? They're an extended metaphor about his imaginary riches. Sometimes, he says, my strong box gets robbed of all its jewels. Sometimes a pair of eyes, they just walked in with you, steal all my beautiful dreams away. No wonder he tells her, when she asks who he is, "Son un poeta," I am a poet. And here, in a more tragic situation, is Rodolfo again singing his grief in triplets. Marcello is a figure drawn from several painters Murger knew. In the stories, the Red Sea that Marcello paints in the attic is a picture rejected so often by the Louvre that Murger says if it were put on wheels, it could make the journey from the attic to the committee room and back by itself. I always feel that Puccini shortchanged his Marcello, who doesn't get an aria or even a theme of his own. But nobody ever had a better friend than Marcello, and maybe his good heart is best seen in this strain in the duet with Rodolfo in the last act. Schaunard, the musician without whose pluck the rest of them just might have starved, is based on an Alexandre Schaunard who actually called himself Schaunard when eventually he published his memoirs. In the original stories, Schaunard writes rather unorthodox symphonies, one of which is called On the Influence of Blue in the Arts, an idea he gets painting the blue sky from the top of Notre Dame. Yes, in Murger, Schaunard is something of a painter as well as composer. But in Puccini, he's all composer. In fact, as he comments on Musetta's self-dramatizing at the Café Mamou, Schaunard seems to have the makings of an opera composer, to be the closest of the four Bohemians to Puccini himself, and Puccini gives him this jaunty theme. Closest to me, and I suppose closest to the college boys I have taught classics to over the years, is Colina, the philosopher. He knows his politics and his pawn shops, and he stumbles down the stairs, and he says he prefers to a wench like Musetta a smoking pipe and a Greek text. Actually, he feels the pain of loneliness, and he quotes Horace as a defense against that pain. It must be from Colina that the others come by their light-hearted classical references, when, for example, Schaunard debates with him in legal Latin as to whether they should admit Mimi to their Bohemian circle. Colina is the one who waves the herring they will have to split 4 ways and dubs it a dish fit for Demosthenes. The orator Demosthenes was famous for haranguing, and the words herring and harangue sound as alike in Italian as they do in English. Colina is bearishly big and hirsute, which the others remind him of often enough. Murger patterned him after one of his friends called the Green Giant, because his overcoat, with its 4 big pockets named after the 4 main libraries of Paris, got so old it had faded from black to green. Puccini gives the philosopher this theme, half serious, half whimsical. And of course Puccini gives Colina that aria to his overcoat before he goes off to pawn it to get medicine for the dying Mimi. That overcoat, in its quiet way, bespeaks the disillusionment of La Boheme, Bohemian life. What is Bohemian life? As Marcello sings, it's a beautiful time of false illusions. You believe, you hope, and everything looks beautiful. But it's all an illusion. Murger's 23 stories tell us that La Vie de Bohème is a necessary but preliminary stage in an artist's development. The Bohemia he wrote about is not the place on the map in Central Europe. It is the place on the edge of bourgeois society where the prospective writer or painter or composer or thinker learns about life and love and suffering and death. It is also a place he must leave before it destroys him, not by forcing him to freeze or starve, but by arresting him in a world of dreams and hopes, of promiscuity and rebellion, until, never really learning the discipline needed to write his poem or paint his picture, he despairs. What happens to our 4 Bohemian musketeers after Mimi dies? Well, according to Murger, they leave La Vie de Bohème and join the establishment. Perhaps by their Bohemian standards, they turn out to be failures. Schaunard writes popular songs, and, perish the thought, makes money. Colina, even worse, marries into high society and eats cake. Marcello gets his paintings displayed in an exhibition and actually sells one of them, ironically to an Englishman whose mistress was the very Musetta he had once loved. And Rodolfo, he gets good reviews for his first book, and Marcello tells him, "We are done for, old buddy. We are dead and buried. There's nothing left for the two of them to do but settle down, sadder but wiser, to steady work, with Mimi and Musetta as beautiful memories." So maybe the loveliest touch in Puccini is how, after wringing our hearts with Mimi's unforgettable death scene, he ends his opera with an orchestral reminiscence of something that quietly symbolizes the artist's life, the sacrifices an artist makes, and the humanity he learns as he lives La Boheme. The last measures of the opera are given over, surprisingly, but rightly, to Colina's overcoat. And that's La Vie de Bohème, a life with books and art and music and young love and good fellowship, but a life also cold and cruel. Vie charmante et vie terrible, a charming life and a terrible one.